What is up, everyone? FightHype.com here holding it down. Of course, I'm with Lance Pugmire, formerly of the LA Times, right now with USA Today. And of course, he works here on FightHype.com. I'm Sean Zittel of FightHype.com. And this is actually a part two. Me and Lance talked about Jake Paul, Hasim Rahman Jr., but then the fight gets canceled over the weekend. So time to revisit it, Lance. The fight is off due to weight stipulations. Rahman was unable to get down to 200 in time, so the commission moved it up to 205, at which point it becomes a little bit of he said, she said. Rahman is on the record yesterday saying he could have got to 205 by fight time. Jake Paul's camp released a statement saying he told the commission, I'm not even going to attempt to get below 215, therefore the fight's off. Your thoughts on the fight that never was?
Again, I think we're going back to, do you trust Jake Paul or not, and I do, from the standpoint of, look, this is his first pro boxing fight. He wants it to be, where the contract stipulated it should be, and it wasn't going to be. So he had to make the decision, am I going to go out, like it or not? Am I going to go out of my comfort zone and take this fight against Rahman? And he made the decision, no, I'm not, I'm canceling it. And, look, I know this back and forth is very interesting. There's a lot of, like you said, he said over, where his weight has been throughout this whole process. But look, he signed on the dotted line that he was going to meet this weight. He was falling short of that. And then he tried to get Jake, to move back and sort of question his manhood over not doing it. But it's like, look, you made a deal. And there's been a lot of precedent for this. You fall short of the weight, and in a lot of cases, the fight doesn't happen. So at the end of the day, look, this guy, the opportunity was there for him to fight Jake Paul if he met this weight. He couldn't make the weight, and Jake Paul, instead of saying, like, I'm going out of my comfort zone, says, fight off.
Well, like you said, it comes down to a little bit of do you trust Jake Paul or not? And I remember Diego Corrales, who would literally fight anybody. He gets knocked out in his rematch with Jose Luis Castillo because Castillo doesn't make weight. They're set to fight for a third time, tons of money on the table. Castillo doesn't even come close to making weight. You probably covered that fight, Lance, and the fight was off. So we don't. If at the championship level, these guys don't expect to get in there with a guy who's 3 or 4 pounds above where they're weighing in at. I understand Jake Paul saying this guy's talking about being 15 pounds heavier than me on the scale. So I understand that. But that being said, I understand him not being above the benefit of the doubt, not getting the benefit of the doubt, Jake Paul, because, Tommy Fury, maybe you knew beforehand that he had these issues with MTK getting overseas. And now with Hasim Rahman, I do think had Rock made the weight, if everything was going according to Jake Paul's team's plan, they would have went ahead and taken the fight. But maybe this is a little bit of a karmic resolution for him, trying to squeeze this guy down 20 to 30 pounds in the last couple of weeks, trying to handicap him a little bit. And maybe he doesn't get a whole lot of sympathy from people, Lance, because Ben Askren competed at 170 pounds and was below 6 feet tall. Same thing for Tyron Woodley. He was a 170-pounder, not even 6 feet tall. Nate Robinson, not even 6 feet tall. Playing weight was 180 pounds. Even the guy he fought with, he's been naturally bigger and taller than every fighter he's faced. So for the first time, he's going up against, with the shoe on the other foot, he's going up against a naturally bigger guy. And so I don't know if people are going to rush to sympathy for him that this happened over their size issue, even though at the end of the day, if you're Rahman Jr., you really let this get away from you, because if it's true that you only lost a pound in 2 or 3 weeks, were you, I'm sure you were training hard. We saw you were training hard, but were you eating everything right? Were you doing everything you could to cut down? It becomes he says, she says, because Rahman says he could have made 205 had he been given the opportunity. But yeah, the fight is off, and I was convinced that, Rahman was going to have success early in that fight with his jab. The jab's the best punch in boxing. It's the punch. Dimitri Bivol had success with Canelo. So even elite fighters have struggled against the jab. I think Jake Paul's never fought anyone with a jab, but he's shown the tenacity in his first fight when he fought with headgear on and his nose was broken. He fought through that and got the knockout on the road in England. So I think he was going to eat that jab a dozen times early. And the question was going to become, would Rahman gas and would his hands fall and that jab start to come back lower and Paul could eventually nail him with that right hand over the top? We'll never know. But I'm rambling a little bit here, Lance. Help me here because there's
not at all. I think, look, the thing that I go back to is my conversation last week with Steven Espinoza of Showtime, who obviously is not very happy with this development. And I know when Steven was touting the fight, he was saying, like, look, I understand that Jake Paul's a favorite here, but the thing you cannot discount is that for Hasim Rahman Jr., this is the fight of his life. And so he's going, this is with Steven before all this happened, he's going to come into this event at Madison Square Garden, this main event, and be as primed and ready as he can possibly be. But that's absolutely as far from the truth as we could be. So that's where I lean to the side of Jake Paul in this. Like, Rahman signed on that contract. He has a main event at MSG if he can make this weight. He let it get away from him, and now he's saying whatever he wants to say to go after Jake Paul's manhood. And maybe Jake could have found an alternate fighter to take on with a week's preparation, but Jake obviously didn't want to do that. But Rahman is the one who's fallen short here, and I'm sorry, but like these numbers exist, and you signed for these numbers to meet these numbers. The fact that you haven't means that you have fallen short. And unfortunately, I know we talked about the merits of these types of events, Sean. Mm-hmm. This one is going to get away from us, and it'll be interesting to see what Jake does now. Like I said in that conversation with Steven Espinoza, there was some interesting possibilities for him to fight next. And now I think we could be in a situation where Jake would fight later in the year. He can now watch and see what happens with Nate Diaz's UFC Swan Song fight coming up in September. I'd still would be very interested in seeing Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz. I know we're not all the way there to Jake Paul versus a professional boxer, but we would be there with Jake Paul versus a professional fighter, someone who has fought at the highest level of the UFC. So some interesting bouts still before Jake, and it'll be very interesting to see where it goes.
Well, Lance, those fights, Nate Diaz, Conor McGregor, faded, smaller MMA fighters, not boxers. Those have way more upside financially than fighting Tommy Fury and Hasim Rahman Jr.
Yes.
And they pose, in my opinion, a less threat of him actually getting beat and stopping this baby train. And you mentioned Espinoza being disappointed with the fallout, understandably so, and no one's against making money. If Jake Paul's going to draw more revenue for your budget and for your network than other fighters, then he's the fighter you go to. You'd be a fool not to do that. But that being said, you dance with the devil a little bit. You get into the circus business, and the circus could go haywire sometimes, and that's happened a little bit. And also with Jake, I agree with you. There's really no way not to agree with you. If you agree to a contract and you do not fulfill or live up to it, then it's pretty cut and dry at that point. But I still got to go back to my point of I don't know how much that's going to get him in the court of public sympathy when he's made little guys get in the ring, blow up to fight him at a natural weight advantage. And now, the shoe would have been on the other foot, and he didn't want to go through with that, very understandably so. But, I'm not sure. And then along those lines, too, me talking about the circus, I kind of want to retread, because this is something we talked about originally in our first video, is I think Jake Paul is good for Jake Paul. I'm not sold Jake Paul is good for boxing. I'm not sold that Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence, if it ever gets made, is to do 500,000 buys. Oh, but wait, Jake Paul's in boxing now. It's going to do 600,000 buys because of the exposed. I'm not sold on that. And I'm not sold he hurts the sport. For all I know, for every young fan, he intrigues. He alienates the core demographic of boxing, which is an older crowd. And they go, I can't believe the sport that I used to watch is this shit now. I'm going to turn on UFC. So I'm not sold he moves the needle one way or the other. I think originally, you know, he has some songs, but he's not really a musician. He's done some work with Disney, but he's not really an actor. I think the last 20 years since the new millennium, we started to have people who are famous for being famous. And though he certainly accomplished some things, and his fundamentals are very good for a guy who started in his 20s. Superb for a guy who started in his 20s. I'm not knocking him, but he's kind of famous just for being famous. And so I go along with the ride because it makes us money, it gets us clicks, but I'm still puzzled as to what the original infatuation for society is with these two guys, just in, you know, so.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the thing that we've talked about before, Sean, is this, you know, like two guys fighting each other who the world wants to see. I mean, you name two names, and there can be a lot of intrigue in that. Like, hey, what if this guy fought this guy? I mean, even someone from the NFL, the 49ers tight end, just posted a thing. Yeah, exactly. Who would win between the gorilla and a grizzly bear? And it makes you think. Believe me, we were going back and forth on the family text link. Who's going to win this fight? I said grizzly bear, but I could be wrong, you know. But I think that that's what's in play here. Is like and again, you know, what we talked about is that my generation, 40 plus, you know, probably doesn't like this very much because we're not watching YouTube like my children are. You know, my son watches Jake Paul, Logan Paul, all those guys out there, and and these kids know all these stories that are connected to these guys. And Jake Paul does have substance, you know, and that's why he's got such a massive audience of subscribers on his YouTube channel, because he kind of speaks from the heart on a lot of different things about the life that he has made for himself and his brother has made as well. And it resonates to this audience. And so now he wants to get involved in boxing. And from my perspective as a boxing writer, I mean, some of the things that he's sort of taken on, you know, are credible. I mean, he's taken on fighter pay with the UFC. He's taken on saying that female fighters, you know, are going through the same grind as male fighters. They deserve increased pay, and they deserve to be on a raised platform, as he's given Amanda Serrano. This is stuff that I applaud. So I think there is some decency and honor in Jake Paul. Yes, he says a lot of things that are quite crazy and are said clearly, you know, just to get attraction, such as saying that he can defeat Canelo Alvarez or that he wants to fight Tyson Fury. I mean, this is crazy. We know how this will end as boxing purists. And if you're a boxing purist who doesn't want to watch this, that's fine. But you know what? He has brought a lot of eyeballs to the sport. And even if it's
his events and to his fights, I'm not sold he's brought eyeballs to other fighters' fights that he's not involved with.
I disagree. I think from the standpoint of, you know, he's got people talking about boxing, and he's mentioning some of these names, these other guys who are involved in the sport. So if people who are interested in Jake Paul are now a little bit more interested in boxing, they can say like, hey, I want to see this at its highest levels. I want to see, you know, Canelo Alvarez fight, and what's he got? I want to see Spence Crawford when it takes place, because this is the biggest thing in boxing, and you know, Jake Paul is my favorite boxer.
Well, him and Canelo probably draws more money than any other fight for Canelo outside of a rematch with Floyd Mayweather. You know, so
exactly. So I mean, look, I think you know, my opinion on this is that, you know, for those of us that want to be so hardcore and serious, we have plenty of fights to watch, and some of those fights are awful and boring to watch. Let's be honest.
And some of them he's watching and tweeting about as well to help the sport. To his credit, you know, he's tweeting about Haney Kambosos. He's tweeting about Spence Crawford. He's a fan of the sport at times as well. Yeah.
So I think that, you know, look, I mean, we can have a good time with this. We can enjoy it. We can kind of look at it and say it is what it is. We know what this is, but let's have a couple laughs. You know, it's a Saturday night after all, and relax and see what happens, because there is, again, when it comes to fighting, there's intrigue about the outcome until that deciding punch is landed.
No, absolutely. And he helped promote in large part, you know, the biggest women's fight financially. You know, like he promoted the biggest women's fight, and he was a huge reason why that smashed at the box office. So again, I'm giving him credit where it's due. And he talks about the fighter pay and the MMA. But if you don't go along with the Jake Paul program, he'll be awfully quick to turn all that respect he has for the sport off, because he can quickly call. Clarissa Shields is probably the greatest female fighter in boxing history. And the minute she doesn't go along with the Jake Paul program, she's a loser. That's what he calls it. She's a loser. Canelo, disrespects him. Hey, you talk shit, he's going to talk shit too. But he's quick to disregard a Tyson Fury, a Canelo, a Clarissa Shields. These are the kings and the queens of our sport. Yeah. So he holds all this respect until he doesn't. And back to your point of why people 40 and above, maybe not always in love with what's happening with Jake Paul in boxing. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's because at that time, that generation was still from the era of fame is garnered by accomplishment and talent and, all of those types of things. Whereas, once the new millennium came and the internet exploded and social media, you could become famous for being famous, which is, I think he originally was closer to being that kind of a character, a Kim Kardashian, than he was a Bill Russell, who just passed away. Someone we know on his first and last name basis because of what he accomplished, what he did. So, right. And so that all of that is at play, but people are tuning in, and to garner why people are more attracted to something like this instead of, world championship fights would regard a whole other discussion, that kind of goes beyond the bounds of boxing, but it is what it is. We'll see who he fights later this year. He's a revenue generator, and for as long as he's generating revenue, he's going to get a lot of attention in boxing from us and everybody. And that is the reality of the situation.
Absolutely, Sean. Now, since he's not fighting this weekend, the fight that remains is welterweight Vergil Ortiz, undefeated welterweight Vergil Ortiz, taking on England's Michael Mckinson in Texas, right in Ortiz's hometown, basically. Mm-hmm. What's your take on Vergil Ortiz? I not who's going to win this fight, because I think we both expect Ortiz to have his way in this bout, but where is he kind of left in this welterweight division, where we've got this kind of drawn out Spence Crawford negotiations? We've got these other guys who are without fights right now, and Vergil Ortiz fighting for Golden Boy, and I don't see a lot of anyone really expressing interest in fighting him.
No, I really, it's a shame that Golden Boy wasn't able to match Rashidi Ellis before Rashidi departed for the PBC, because I think Ortiz needed that look for his development as a fighter. If he's going to adjust to the hand speed of a Boots Ennis or a Terrence Crawford, he needed to see a guy like Rashidi Ellis to get a taste of that before he's in the big dance. So, and I feel the same way right now about Ryan Garcia with Jojo Diaz at 135. He needs a look at that southpaw aggressive style, same height and build as a Tank Davis before he fights Tank Davis. So that got away. But Mckinson actually represents a little bit of that as well, because McKinson's a rangy southpaw. He's not dynamic, athletic, and has the punching power of Ennis or Crawford. But Ennis fights a lot of rounds as a southpaw. Crawford fights most of his rounds as a southpaw, and Spence is a southpaw. So he is getting some seasoning that'll help him in his development to have to get ready for those guys. Because McKinson's a rangy guy, a little bit of a tricky guy, and Ortiz is a straight up and down guy. He's and Spence is that way too, very fundamentally sound. And that style can get exploited by the counter punchers, by the slick guys, and Mckinson brings some of that to the table so Ortiz can develop that to get ready for them. But Ortiz, people were so enamored with Boots Ennis because he looks like, in terms of physical talent, the best talent in the sport. But Ortiz, in my opinion, is an A blue chip guy at 147 too. He's as much the future of that division if he can keep making it as Boots is. I didn't like the step back in momentum. He knocked out Mean Machine in just as many rounds as Crawford did. He looked great in that fight. Yeah, he got hurt, but he looked great. And then he can't make weight for this fight, and that messed up the momentum a little bit. But I think he gets Mckinson out of there in 10 rounds. He's got to push the pace on this guy. Mckinson's only looking to throw 2-3 punches max and measure you and pop shot you with 2 or 3 shots, and that's it. Ortiz is a combination puncher. He could get he gets going, and he can get it going and going and going as the fight goes on. I don't think Mckinson will be able to keep up with that pace, and Ortiz should be relentless and get him out of there in 10, get some development in. But at that point, all he has left at Golden Boy is Alexis Rocha, which is a good fighter, but we know Ortiz beats him. We know that. Everyone else is on the PBC side of things. He's currently the mandatory for Crawford, so there's, I don't know, maybe there's a 10% chance Crawford, for whatever reasons, just can't come to an agreement with the PBC side, and he's a free agent, and maybe Golden Boy can throw a big offer Crawford's way to get him in the ring with Ortiz. But yeah, after this fight, all that's left for him is Rocha at Golden Boy. What do you think?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate given, you know, how promising he looks right now, and the fact that he is sort of like in this situation where he's, you know, it's musical chairs and he can, you know, he can't get a seat. So it's too bad for Vergil Ortiz, because he is such an impressive puncher. I mean, this guy is a real killer in there. I hope that if Spence Crawford, I hope Spence Crawford happens. If it does fall by the wayside, I would like to see, Crawford has mentioned his name before. I mean, I would love Terrence Crawford to say, you know what, I'll take this guy on. And if he beats him, it makes that fight against Spence even bigger. So you know, all of those things can still happen. It seems like Thurman and Garcia maybe are going to get together now, right, for a rematch. But maybe one of those guys ends up you know, like you said, if Oscar can come up with the money for Vergil to fight one of those guys, maybe that can happen. So much on the table. I just hope that something big comes Vergil Ortiz's way, given how dominant he has been up until this point. And I'm sure that's going to continue on Saturday.
I think so. I think he goes, what is it, 19 for 19 Saturday night? But
Right.
if you're Oscar, do you even make that fight right away with Terrence Crawford? Again, I would have liked to seen him fight Rashidi Ellis first before getting in there with the hand speed of a Crawford, you know. But one thing I like about Ortiz is, if you're going to be a guy who comes forward with those hands up and you're the guy on the front foot, you better have a jab against these fast guys to cut the range. And he does have a good jab. He has a good double jab. And you better go to the body. And he does go to the body. And you better have good stamina. And he does have good stamina. And you better punch hard. He does punch hard. You better throw punches in combination, not one or two. And he does. So I think people look at Ortiz and they go, yeah, he's good. But look at this guy. He's straight up and down. Someone like Crawford or Ennis will pick him apart. Ask Marcos Maidana, Jose Luis Castillo, Miguel Cotto. Those guys gave Floyd Mayweather his toughest styles.
Yeah.
Sometimes that straightforward guy, if he's in shape and he punches hard and he's educated and relentless, he's going to give you all the problems with it. So I like how he's developing. I think he'll be a monster at 47 for as long as he can make it, and equally a monster at 54 because he's a big kid.
Let's get Boots Ennis versus Vergil Ortiz next, Sean.
Oh my! See now,
it's too big. It's too big.
We've gone in the era of over marination, and that would be pre-marination. That fight hasn't been marinated at all. Like that's raw.
I know.
Not even thrown in the oven yet. But
we'd all love to see it, but you know, everyone who needs to watch these guys a little bit more.
I want to see Ennis fight Crawford with Spence if they're not going to fight each other. He might beat both of them, even with the lack of experience.
Yeah. No, I agree. He's a special talent. All these guys are special talents. And look, at the end of the day, let's get them all in the ring and see what happens.
Well, good luck. That's always the hard part in boxing.
We'll keep banging the drum here, you know.
Right. Sitting in our offices as we. Yeah. But I think that about wraps it up. Good talking with you, Lance. Of course, everyone keep it locked with Lance on USA Today. If you're an NFL fan, Lance is doing great work with the NFL. Other college sports, all the above. But of course, he keeps the boxing beat going on USA Today and FightHype. Thanks so much, Lance. Anything else you want to say before you get out of here?
No, thank you so much, Sean. Really appreciate it. Hope you had a great weekend and looking forward to the fight on Saturday.
Yeah, we'll be back with our reactions pretty shortly. What goes down with TF? Oh, actually, we'll probably reconvene after Ortiz fights Mckinson. So we'll be back, guys. Keep it locked in. Thanks everyone for tuning in.